Vic Gatto, your host with the Health Storm. As many of you know, about 8 months ago, I embarked on this journey of the Health Storm, really thinking that I was going to teach others about this coming massive change in the U.S. healthcare system. Of course, that was before COVID, before all the wild times of 2020. It's been a crazy year, tons of change. But what I've really learned that's been surprising and wonderful is how much I've learned from the guests on. We've had 25 or so guests on, and they really have taught me a ton about healthcare, but really about life and how to be successful, how to make a difference, how to make an impact. And so I felt like it would be valuable to put together some of the highlights from that question at the end of most of my shows. What do you know now that you wish you knew 5 or 10 years ago? I watched the video. There's some brilliant people on here giving great advice. Please watch it. I think you'll enjoy it. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you started off?
Well, put yourself under really good leadership, really good discernment, and it's the surrounding thing is a big deal, right? Yeah. Who are you around? But who are you under has become a big focus of my life. Like, I love learning from you, and I love putting myself under people that just, they know more than me, and just, I've talked a lot
or
today,
they know different things. Yeah, right.
Exactly. Right. But being quiet and being still, and that I wish I would have known earlier, but I'm learning, right? Yeah. And it's just, I think wisdom has a pace, and it's not our pace. Wisdom has a very slow pace, and that's something that I am absolutely learning. So that comes in all shapes and sizes. That comes from a science standpoint, that comes from a fundraising standpoint, from a personal health standpoint, all of those things. But I think I'm just learning, and one of the things I really wish I would have known is just that wisdom has a pace that's not Caroline's.
We often don't get out of our comfort zones right away, and we're a little cautious. And sort of, this is a personal perspective, right? But sometimes, you get forced into situations where you got to get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, and that's where you really grow, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for me, it's always been these situations where it's sort of like desperation followed by getting out of comfort zone followed by growth.
I'm glad I didn't know how hard it was, because I may have chosen to do something else. Right. I think focusing on, and we talked a little bit about this, it's important to spend your time focusing on real problems and not just being part of the problem. To work in healthcare is a privilege, and to focus on sort of a mission-driven organization that's doing important work.
I think the one thing that I maybe wish I had done is, I've done a lot of different things, and I've learned a lot, and I'm probably the product of all those experiences. But sometimes it's better to have singular focus and focus on one thing and try and move the ball 1,000 miles in one direction instead of 1 mile in 1,000 directions. Yeah. And, sometimes that's hard to do when you have a lot of interest and they're all competing, but I've definitely learned that you can make more of an impact doing that.
Yeah. So focus, you'd tell your younger self to focus in a smaller set of areas and try to impact. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that, and I think also just the absolute essential fact that you have to be passionate in what you're doing. You have to understand the why of why you're doing it and what your mission is, and you have to be able to communicate that very clearly so that everybody on the team knows what the mission is and it has line of sight between what their role is and the goal you're trying to get to.
When I was younger, when I was first starting to work, I think one thing that was very important to me was being very results oriented and results driven. And it was all about the end product, the end result, getting that right. And what I didn't maybe take as much notice
independent of how you got there?
There you go.
Yeah.
You just stole my words from me. That's fine. That's okay. But yeah, I didn't really take much notice of how I was getting there or why I chose the pathway that I chose. And what I've learned over time is that the why and the how can be just as important as the final result. Because just because you got there doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to end up, going forward. And also, there's so much value in those two components. So in terms of the how you got there, if it was successful, especially in terms of innovation, we want to know how we did it so that we can replicate it.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't successful, then why wasn't it successful? So we can learn from that. And then next time we go about some body of work, we can use those learnings as well as the how learnings and say, okay, we have this extra level of knowledge and information. How do we build upon that?
I think that one of the things that I would point to is we never understand the complexity of the things we're getting into. In one sense, thank goodness we don't, because we never endeavor to.
We wouldn't get out of bed in the morning if we.
Exactly. On the other hand, I think that as I get older, the thing that I have to adjust constantly is my expectation around time. How much time is it going to take to solve a problem? Where can I be effective? How can I apply my resources, my time and treasure to help move the needle in one place or another? And can I achieve that in a responsible time frame?
I've thought about this a lot, and I think it's not even close. The value of relationships, to me, is without a doubt absolutely the most powerful currency we all have. And I think when you're younger, you don't necessarily think about it that way. You're starting your career, you're grinding it out.
And you're sort of been in schools
right.
and, undergrad, grad, and it's all about sort of what you know or can prove you know.
That's right. And you're thinking very day to day. And I think back to the biggest difference between my first job and the job I have now is I'm thinking year to year with regards to a lot of the things that that are bouncing around in my head. And so building relationships with people and being really thoughtful about it and getting to know people and reaching out to people is so valuable. And there's a lot of families that we work with now that are relationships that I had from 15 or 20 years ago when I wasn't even in a position to be doing what I'm doing now. And
and there's something about sort of treating people well and being intellectually curious and taking.
That's right.
Then when you change jobs and you're in a position to help them,
that's right.
They remember that from the
past.
That's
exactly right. I think this goes without saying, and hopefully my kids watch this someday, and maybe your kids will. But
I will send it to Julie.
Being thoughtful all the time, is so important because I forget. I'm not going to get this exact quote right, but the same people you see on the way up are the ones you're going to see on the way down.
Yeah,
and so the world is a very small place now, and people can reach out to 1 or 2 degrees of separation to get a opinion on you. And if have not been thoughtful, if you've been a jerk to somebody for no reason, or that's going to come back. And so you just be thoughtful all the time and get to know a lot of people and really focus on building those relationships. And it takes work. Going to grab a coffee with somebody is great, but 3 months later,
you have to sort of follow up.
You have to follow up, and you have to be intentional about it, and meeting a lot of people and learning from people and getting to know people and helping people. There's a compounding effect in investing. Einstein says the 8th wonder of the world is compounding. I think it's the same thing with relationships. I really do, and I think building those relationships and the more people you get to know and understand and learn from. It only helps, and it might not help you professionally necessarily, but it'll help you personally. You'll become better, and in the long run, it'll just make things. It's just a wonderful thing.
Right. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you started the game?
I wish that I wouldn't have been so trusting of what I call the middleman. I think that employers, for years, we just sat back and we trusted that everything was being done to benefit our members.
We'll run this RFP for you, and we'll get a lot of creativity, but they don't really spend that much time on it.
Well, I think it's that, and I think even if you take a look at like the carriers, they're negotiating the contracts for you between the physicians, the health systems. I think we all have different stake in the game. And so when I look back, my only regret is that we didn't do this earlier. And I think the reason that we didn't, if you take a look at it, and I remember, I started out in the accounting finance world looking at benefits from a very different perspective, very different lens. And I remember thinking one day, it used to be HR people running benefits. And I thought one day it's going to be finance people running benefits because I could just see the escalation trends.
Yeah.
And these are not trends that are just specific to the US. I think the US by far is the most extreme, but we're seeing this in other parts of the world too. And I said, at one point, we're really going to have to get a hold on it. So my only regret is that we didn't start earlier.
Wow, that's a big question, right? So it's almost 2 decades. I had a career that I was in prior to going to medical school after college. I think number one, and this is more of a personal note, number one, I would have probably taken more solace in the fact that I need to try to learn something new every day. I at some point, I'm like, I got too much to do, right? I'm in medical school. I got to
I'm
graduate.
so busy, I can't focus. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I wish I would have known more of that then.
If I talk about, I was what I would call a late bloomer, Vic. I didn't really shift into what I would call entrepreneur-driven growth companies until I was 33, 34 years old. And over the years, I've learned a tremendous amount about how to use structure and process and planning to drive growth, and how to speed up the pace of decision making. How many times have we made a decision that our gut was telling us 9 months ago we should have made all back then? And so if I wish I'd have done anything different from the beginning, I wish I'd have started that journey much earlier, more like right after I came out of college, and just taken that way. I'd be much more equipped in my 40s and 50s to go even stronger and better, and I would have gotten some of my learning lessons over quicker. Yeah.
So talk about that decision-making process. I mean, how do you get it from, I don't know, it's in the back of my mind and I know I should be making this change, but I don't really focus on it, to get it much more like front and center? How do you go through that process?
I think you've got to have scheduled planning time where you get out of the fray and really think about things instead of getting caught up in your day-to-day whirlwind of constantly getting your work done. I mean, being it's an executive is like playing a game of whack-a-mole, where that old game at the Chuck E. Cheese or whatever we all do with our kids. You knock one thing down, another one pops up 3 or 4 feet over. Next thing you look up, 5 minutes have gone by, and all you've done is whack the mallet. And a decision's got to be made. A lot of times it's personnel. A lot of times it's putting something new in place. And you sit there, and it's natural to procrastinate if it's going to be involve change or be a hard decision. And then you just get swept up in the day-to-day. And next thing you know, you look up and you're having the same conversations with yourself as you did 6 or 8 months ago. So I think that personal planning time has got to happen.
Yeah.
I wish that I took more computer science classes. I'll tell you that much. If I knew I was going to be in the tech space, I certainly would have done that. Probably would have gotten a minor.
Not too late. You can still work on it.
Yeah, that might be on the roadmap going forward. I definitely feel a little bit like when I'm talking about product features or working in one of the spaces, I feel like I need to have my hands in something a little bit more. So I think that's a piece. When I wrote the book, the thing that I thought I knew what I knew, and then I started writing the book, and I was like, oh man, I want to include more in here, but I don't know about it. And so like the process of writing the book, you think is a very educating process, but I think I learned that I know less than I think I do through that process. So I think I learned that there's just a whole lot out there. And that's probably the biggest thing I took away from it was I didn't necessarily, I learned more about what I didn't know than what I do know.
Yeah. Interesting. So as you learn more, there's more and more questions almost. Yes. Or how to influence behavior and how to change the system gets more and more complex. The more you see it's just like a level of focus, the more that you see all the different things that need to be worked on.
Absolutely. Yeah. The toughest part for the book is scoping. So being able to say, I'm only talking about this, or I'm swimming in this lane, not getting into these other things is really tough. And so that was definitely a big part of it.
So I think there's probably 2 things that I wish I'd known. I think one thing I wish I'd known is that sometimes that, crises pass, and what seems really, really big and impossible to get over at the moment becomes a faint blur in the distance. So I think just from a sort of Zen perspective, just observing and being equanimous with what goes on, there's good, there's bad, not to get too attached to it all. I think that's a really important lesson that I've learned over time, to try and keep an even-headed about things, because, celebrate your effort, don't celebrate the outcomes, because sometimes those are things we can't control. So that's kind of one I wish I'd known a little bit further back.
That's a good one for all of us to just remind ourselves in these times. I mean, I'm going to go downstairs and turn on the news, and I just need to not turn on the news some days, because it's not that fun, and they're all like crises all the time.
Yeah, the other thing that I think I'd wish I'd learned is just to be a bit more present. I know these may be not healthcare things, but they're, there's so many distractions. There's so many other places we can be, but the most important place is right here, right now. And so, if I was on my phone and trying to do 10 different things and talking to you, we wouldn't have had a great conversation. And so I think just learning how to sort of be here and not wanting to be anywhere else. And I think this COVID thing's actually been a really good lesson in that, being at home with the family and having this really awesome time to spend with my kids, and trying to be really present and very, very local, but at the same time, being able to access the world digitally is really an interesting experience. So I think, just being present with whatever problem ahead, giving people time, I think is just really important. So as a manager and as a people leader, giving them the space that they need to be able to talk, to be able to tell you what's going on. Just being present for people, I think, is something that I wish I'd had more of, both as a physician, both as, in the workplace. I think it's just really important. I think time is one of those things that, is our one commodity that we don't have limitless, enough of. And I think we hopefully learn to, where do we put our time so it's most effective? And I think that's a really important thing. And I think the only other thing I'll say, sort of from a healthcare perspective, is I think the lesson that I did learn is that, you do need to be really thoughtful around all the various parts of healthcare and how it all the jigsaw pieces fit together. Because as much as we'd love a utopian world where the best outcomes and what the patient wants they get, and just solving a problem for one part of the system and that working, it's just not how it works today. We have a very intertwined system with payers and plans and PBMs and patients and government, and that's the system we have, and there are good parts to it and there are bad parts to it, but it is what we've got today, and I think we have to work with what we've got. We can dream about a new system, but I think working within that to create something that's future proof, I think, is really important. So I think the other learn I'd say is, keep the patient in mind, keep all the system in mind, and keep that quadruple aim as your kind of guiding star. And I think if I'd had those things in my career, I may would be in a different place, maybe not, but they would have been really good things that a smarter me in the future would have passed down.
I would say the biggest thing is how power dynamics work. I think I was pretty naive. I think I was pretty naive in terms of just sort of thinking, like, if you just do your work and you put your head down and it's a meritocracy, that you can be effective, particularly if what you're trying to do is be a change maker in the world. But there are existing power dynamics and structures that we all have to manage and we all have to deal with if we want to move things forward, as we spoke about earlier with regards to healthcare and the healthcare system in America. So understanding how to navigate that effectively and with integrity is something that I think is a worthwhile skill that I have been working to develop over time and understand.
Yeah, and the first piece is to understand how the existing power structure works today. As you can't navigate it if you don't know where the rocks are and where the channel is and how to go through.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so I guess what you're saying is 10, 15 years ago, you didn't worry about that and just tried to sail through, where you could study it more and try to navigate it better. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're trying to get from point A to point B and you want to reach point B, you have to understand how point A works. And so I mean, I can be the greatest lawyer in the world in terms of, I can be the greatest entrepreneur, whatever it is, in terms of the product that I put out. But if I don't know how to market it correctly, and I don't know how to secure funding for it, and funding comes many times from power structures and people in powerful positions.
The existing infrastructure that you're going to sell into, all these pieces that you need to understand in order to get from point A to point B.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that interdisciplinary approach. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I have done so many different things, in part is because I realized that in order to be effective in this time period that we're in, you really actually do need to have your foot in an understanding and experience, and your foot in a number of different disciplines in order to push change forward.
Right. And kind of understand that perspective from doing the job for a little while, and then you can go back and interact with them.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't trade my government experience for anything. I learned so much from how the government works to how the government doesn't work.
Right.
And if you want to make change within the government that's helpful for people systematically, how do you actually do that so that it's effective, rather than it's just not a, lots of people have great ideas. Few people actually see them through.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to say. I mean, I always talk about entrepreneurs on Sunday night around the barbecue. It's really easy to talk about the thing you could invent if you quit your job and just did it. But it's very different when you actually quit your job and are there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and have no pay and no real idea, and the product doesn't work like you think it's going to work, and it's just much harder to execute all the way to completion.
Yeah. And there'll be a lot of people along the way that'll tell you that you're crazy, or they don't really understand you, or, like, especially when you're seeing things a little bit differently. And I think, like, that's the other thing, is just kind of like believing in yourself, and believing in your convictions, but being willing to change, and not being so hard-headed when you are wrong to admit that you're wrong.
And knowing the difference is what's hard, right? Like, if you're an entrepreneur, or you're a change agent in government, or you're trying to do something globally that's not well known, some people are going to be naysayers that you should ignore because they don't understand. And some people are going to appear like naysayers, but they have a lot of good knowledge that you should incorporate and change your idea.
That's right.
How do you
being able to make that? Yeah, being able to make that judgment call and see. And a lot of it's like, where are people coming from, and what have their sets of experiences been to date, in order to, like, do they really have, like, if somebody comes in and asks me about where they should go for their residency program as a medical student, I am not the right person to listen to. You know what I mean? Like, not it. And so, but I've seen people give advice as if they are, and they take somebody down the wrong road. And so just kind of being able to see that, know that, and I have different mentors for different areas. And I always go to my mentors before I make a decision, before I make a major decision. I'm constantly in contact with them. One of my mentors in South Africa, I'm in contact with several times a week. I view my profession as an apprenticeship. And I will always be learning, and I will always be working on to get better, and to also admit my mistakes and understand why I've made mistakes. I think that's the other thing. We're getting into this environment now, or we are in this environment now, which we call the cancel culture, which doesn't allow for people to make mistakes. I think that's really dangerous. We're human beings. We're going to make mistakes, and we're probably going to make more mistakes than we actually get it right.
The key is not making mistakes. It's making mistakes and learning from them and doing better the next time, and not giving up and continuing.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is, and I'm learning to do this now, is being a good manager, and understanding how to manage and to scale ideas too. So you can have a good idea that you actually do see through, but then how do you scale it? And that takes a team effort, and working with teams takes management. And I also have learned the art of saying, I'm sorry. And acknowledging when I keep going back to the mistakes, but like acknowledging when I've messed up, when I've made a bad call. If I made a bad call, which I do, and then I try to run it into the ground that I'm right on that bad call,
right,
It's just, it wastes time.
That's demotivating to the team, right? Yeah.
No, you lose respect, and you lose focus, and it's ego driven. That's when it's really, truly ego driven. So also, if I have advice for people, just in general, because we're human beings, manage the ego. Manage your own ego first.
Right.
If somebody's having to manage your ego, it's a sign that you're not doing your work.